Shalom and welcome to the One Pasuk podcast, where the rabbis at Congregation Avas Torah each share an insight on one particular pasuk from the Parsha and reflect on each other's ideas. Rabbinic banter, I like to call it. I am Chaim Pupko, and I am joined by my dear friends and teammates, Rabbi Daniel Goldberg
Shalom.
And Rabbi Morty Jesus.
Shalom.
If you'd like to sponsor an upcoming episode, please contact the shul. All right, here we go. Our one pasuk for this week, Parshas Lecha, comes from the very beginning of the Parsha, Perek Yud Beis, pasuk Aleph, chapter 12, verse 1. Vayomer Hashem el Avram, Hashem says to Avram, Lecha, me artzecha, umi moladtecha, umi beis avicha, el haaretz asher areka. Lecha, go forth, or whatever Lecha means, from your homeland, from your birthplace, from your father's house, to the land that I will show you. This is how the Torah introduces us to Avram, how his story begins. It really needs no more introduction. Who's kicking us off?
I'll take it. Generally, we think that there is no introduction to Avraham, right? This is like when we pick up Hashem's first address to Avram. But if you turn back to the very end of Parshas Noach, it's fascinating. There is actually kind of a preface to this. We learn about Terach, Avraham's father, and we hear, the Torah tells us, Vayikach Terach es Avram bino ve'es Lot v'chulei, and where are they going? Vayetzu itam me'ur kasdim laleches arza Canaan. That Terach took his whole family, including Avram, and they left Ur Kasdim to go to Canaan. So Avram is already kind of on this journey to Canaan, which ends, the pasuk tells us, in Haran. They got to Haran and they stopped. They decided not to complete the rest of the journey for whatever reason. But it's fascinating that this monumental, the beginning of Lech Lecha, of this first call to the land, is actually like the second act of something that already started, which is so intriguing. Rav Aaron Lichtenstein points out that these two journeys to Canaan, the first was a failed, but the initial journey, and then this one, the call of Lech Lecha, they represent kind of, or imbue the land with two different dimensions. The first journey from Ur Kasdim that was supposed to end in Canaan was fleeing from religious persecution in Ur Kasdim. The Midrashim describe the way that they were treated and mistreated there, and they had to leave. They had to run away. And so the first journey to Eretz Yisrael, at the time Canaan, is really a journey of refuge. The land of Eretz Yisrael is a place of refuge for us. But that's not enough. That's insufficient. They don't even make it there. Because, you find someplace else that's safe enough, and that's good enough. The second journey of Lech Lecha imbues the land with a different dimension, which is not just refuge, a place to be safe, but something aspirational, something that represents our highest religious goals. And that is the one that we really celebrate. And that is the one that ultimately ends with Avram making it to Canaan. And just thinking about the land of Israel as having these dual qualities, I think is so relevant. Today we're all feeling, since October 7th, we're all really feeling, I think, an increased sense of awareness and insecurity. And we're thinking about Eretz Yisrael as a place to go, ironically, because it is at war, but still as a place to go to be safe. But of course, Eretz Yisrael is so much more. It represents that highest goal of our religious and spiritual lives, something that just can't be replicated anywhere.
Yeah, what I love about that is that you see that in practice. When some of our children go to Israel for the year, there's the element of them discovering themselves, and then there's that idea that the land embraces them. And so many of them come back, not just more committed to Judaism and the land of Israel, but prouder, and their identity is more evident, that it's so closely associated with that influence that they experienced when going to Israel. So you really see that dimension in practice here in our community, where these children come back and they're so committed, they're so excited by what they experienced there, and I feel like that idea really captures it.
Actually, that beautiful distinction, Rabbi Goldberg, that you made between Terach's journey from Haran as merely an escape, while Avram's journey to Canaan represents the realization of a mission, a destiny. It reminds me of a well-known idea from the philosopher Isaiah Berlin, who is most well known for distinguishing between negative freedom and positive freedom. Negative freedom, he says, is freedom from. freedom from constraints, persecutions, any obstacles towards a person living freely. But that's not the same thing as positive freedom. Freedom two is when a person has the opportunity and has the means by which to realize their aspirations, their dreams, their goals, exactly the way you described Avram's journey to Canaan as representing this notion of positive freedom.
Beautiful.
I wanted to highlight a seemingly superfluous word in the pasuk. Many of the Mefarshim point out that the word Lecha, go for yourself, seems to be extra and unnecessary. Could have easily have just said, Vayomer Hashem el Avram, Lech mi'artzecha u'molatecha. Why did I have to add the word Lecha? So famously Rashi says, go for yourself. What exactly does that mean? The next pasuk mentions that there's a number of blessings that Abraham will experience when he goes. God's going to make him a great nation, and he's going to make his name great. There's going to be, in general, there's going to be a certain level of blessing that he wouldn't have experienced otherwise. I think this is a profoundly important idea when we think about tests and we think about our commitment to Torah and mitzvot. Sometimes we feel like we're compromising and we feel like we have to do these types of things. Avraham, who we call Avinu, is incorporated in our own DNA, our genes, our being, this idea that any time we're willing to do what it is that Hashem tells us, essentially we're being selfish in the process because automatically it comes with beracha. Re'eh anochi noten lefnechem hayom beracha uklala. Always Hashem reminds us that when we are willing to live a life of Torah and mitzvot, it's a privileged existence. But not only is it something that Hashem demands from us, but it's a two-way relationship. Hashem ensures that when we do things that we're supposed to do, when we live a life of Torah and mitzvot, and we push ourselves to do what's right, to experience these tests of sorts in each in our own way, and the challenges that we try to overcome on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis, Hashem says, Lecha. Ultimately, as for ourselves, we're going to experience a more meaningful and happier existence. But not just that, Hashem's also going to shower us with blessing in the process. Sometimes I feel like we think mitzvot are like, we got to be martyrs about them. You know, we have to push ourselves and we have to compromise and we have to live this really challenging life. But hey, don't worry about it. In the world to come, Hashem's going to reward us. No, right. Hashem's telling Abraham, Lecha. Go now. It's going to be great. Eschal hagoy gadol. I'm going to make you a great name. It's not about finding the most difficult aspects of Judaism and throwing yourself into that and saying like, I'm a hero. No, there's something so beautiful about this way of life, about our opportunity to spend time with our family on Shabbat without any distractions, about coming to shul, having a place where we connect to Hashem and talk to Him and make requests. And it's not always... being a martyr. I feel like a lot of times that there was a time in history where it was helpful to like preach this idea of martyrdom and preach this idea of you have to, and if you don't, it's going to be really scary and Hashem's going to go get you. And it doesn't resonate really with our youth today. There has to be that projection of what's beautiful about the religion and all the beracha that comes along with it.
Right. There's almost like a subtlety here because he's saying Lech. He's saying leave your comfort zone, meaning do something that appears to be inconvenient, that feels very difficult, but it will be Lecha, meaning they're both true. Not that Judaism is always, chilling on a Shabbos morning. It's not always so obviously or so immediately or intuitively fun and wonderful. It's like, Lech, go out of your comfort zone, push yourself, feel a sense of obligation, but ultimately, and not in the distant future, not in the world to come, but I'm saying like, ultimately what you'll get from it is it's for you. It's amazing, but it requires that discomfort.
It's like what we see in Chazal, where they say, Lo nitnu ha-mitzvos ela letzaref bahen hasabrios, that the mitzvos are given to us in order to refine us, in order that we should benefit and grow and ultimately achieve something, whether we can feel that while we're experiencing the mitzvos or not. Ultimately, we'll be able to see that the mitzvos have made us better people. The Medrash asks, Ma ichbas la l'HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what does Hashem care whether a person shechs an animal from this place on the neck or that place on the neck? When we perform mitzvahs sometimes, we don't feel immediately its impact upon us, how it refines us. But ultimately, they do.
Right.
Lecha.
That relates to like a different part, which is the Lech Lecha, like go to yourself, which is like go and do this thing so you become, right, and not just Lahanascha, but to yourself, to become yourself, meaning to become Avraham, right? Like it's a refining, like Lech, you go to yourself, even though you're leaving, you're actually going to arrive at who you really are. That's like Litzaref.
What I wanted to speak about, I think, complements nicely the ideas we've discussed so far. When you look at the first pasuk of Parshas Lech Lecha, where Hashem turns to Avraham and summons him, Lech Lecha, it appears out of the blue. We don't know anything about Avraham before Hashem says Lech Lecha. Chazal have to come in and fill in that gap. It's like something I remember learning in English literature, in medias res. Right, it starts in the beginning of the story, of the narrative. I believe I heard that in the class that was discussing Shakespeare.
I know it from like art, that there are art scenes like that are in the middle of a moment. That like that's what when I learned it in high school. It was an art history class. I'm sure it's both.
But we do know one thing about Avraham before Hashem speaks to him in our parsha. We read last week at the very end of Parshas Noach that Terach is the one who began the journey out of Ur Kasdim to go specifically to the land of Canaan. Terach brought his family, including Avraham, but he stopped on the way there. He never got to the land of Canaan. He stopped in Haran, and he dies there. And it's there that Hashem turns to Avraham and says, Lech Lecha, to that very same land that Terach was going towards. So why? What propelled Terach to emigrate to Canaan? Nowhere does it say Hashem said to Terach, Lech Lecha. Is it a coincidence that the land that Terach was going to was the very same one that Hashem would tell Avram to go to and give to him and his descendants? The explanation of this, I believe, is based on understanding a different perspective about prophecy. We tend to think that prophecy is like Hashem calling someone on their phone, right? Hashem dials a Navi's number in order to speak to him. Hashem provides nevuah, prophecy, to a specific prophet. But that may not necessarily be true in all cases, because prophecy is also the ability to perceive a message that Hashem is broadcasting to the world for everyone to hear. But what it means to be a prophet is to have the capacity to hear that message, to have the spiritual refinement that gives one the ability to perceive that message that Hashem is broadcasting. It's exactly like radio frequencies. There are radio waves in the air that we cannot see or sense or whatever, but if we have the right antenna, if we have the right radar, then we can pick up those frequencies. And so Terach was motivated to go to the land of Canaan because he heard something. His antenna, his spiritual radar wasn't as refined as Abraham's. And so he discerned some kind of message. There was a lot of static. It was breaking up, but he heard enough to start moving to the land of Canaan. But it was Avraham who had a level of prophecy that enabled him to hear the message clearly. Avram was able to hear Lech Lecha because he was tuned to the right divine frequency. And I think we can find a very powerful lesson in this, because I think many people are waiting to be inspired. They want to be inspired. They want to find meaning within their Jewish practice, but they're waiting for it to happen. They're waiting to come across, to hear the right thing, to have the right experience. But in order to be inspired, a person has to put themselves in a place in which they can be inspired. A person has to prime themselves. You have to have the right radar antenna to be able to receive that kind of inspiration. And so, for example, if a person wants to be inspired by tefillah, but they have a hard time following along, or they don't really put much effort into understanding or appreciating the davening more deeply, it's going to be hard to find that inspirational moment. But if they're able to make the effort to stick with the davening, even when it's not inspirational, then that moment will come. You may not see it coming, you may not be able to create it, but because you've put yourself in a position, you'll be able to have that moment.
It reminds me of the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. The Mishnah says, Kol yom bayom, bat kol yotzaat mehar chorev, ve'omer oy lahem lebriot me'elbona shel Torah, right? And the Baal Shem Tov asks a famous question, how come none of us hear it? If it's being mentioned, we should all hear it. And if we don't hear it, what's the point of mentioning it? And the Baal Shem Tov says we all hear it. There are times in our lives, in our day, where we feel a certain level of inspiration, but we have to be attuned to it. We have to say, hey, I felt that because Hashem's sending me a message. And if I'm on the right frequency, I'll hear the message. And if I do something with that message, I'll ultimately experience the I'll experience that good, that blessing that I'm seeking. And so, Rabbi Pupko, that's such a profound idea because they're out there. These moments of we enjoy the inspiration and it helps us go to that next level, but often we tend to ignore it. And the reason we ignore it is precisely because we're not on that right frequency. We may have felt it, the tug in our heart, but we moved on quickly. You know, when you pass the shul, let's say, and you see people pulling in for Mincha Maariv, and you're like, you know what, I happen to have a half hour, but I'm not really a weekday guy, so just let me continue past. No, that was the Bat Kol Yotzat Me'achorev. That was Hashem talking to Avraham on that frequency, which we have to tap into. And if we're capable of looking around us, you'll see Hashem is sending us those messages. What we do with it is up to us. That inspiration is being felt, and we could capitalize it. We could consistently take life to the next level with our willingness to tune in, to hear, to understand, okay, now it's my part. Hashem did his. He sent me that little message. I understood it. I'm going to pull into the driveway and daven, even though I wasn't necessarily planning on doing that today.
Thank you all so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed. If you're interested in sponsoring a future episode, please reach out to one of us. And of course, please send us your feedback. Shabbat Shalom and Good Shabbos from the One Pasuk Podcast.
את הארץ הזאת